Moving on to our next speaker is a colleague of mine here in the National Disease Control Centre, Sunita Jeawon. We're responsible for maintaining preparedness and I suppose the response to controlling exotic transboundary diseases, and Sunita is going to talk about one of them this evening. The diseases that we are responsible for are generally ones that have a severe or the potential to have a very severe impact on animal health, public health or trade. So Sunita herself graduated from University College Dublin in 2010 and spent the first 5 years of her career in equine practice in a number of countries across the world, Australia, Belgium, here in Ireland, and also in the UK. In 2015, she then returned to UCD to complete her residency in equine internal medicine and has also a doctorate degree of veterinary medical specialism in the area, subsequently becoming a diplomat of the European College of Equine Internal Medicine. She joined the department, we're lucky enough that she joined the department in May 2018 as a veterinary inspector in the Border Control Policy team, assisting with our Brexit preparedness, in particular in the area of import controls. She moved to the team here in the National Disease Control Centre in February this year, and she's going to talk to you this evening about Bluetongue, which is a disease, I suppose, that the department here we're very concerned about from the outbreak and the implications that an outbreak of Bluetongue virus could have, very serious implications for both the health of the national herd and also an impact on live exports of cattle and sheep. So Sunita will fill you in on more detail now. I'll hand over to you, Sunita.
Thanks, June. I hope you can hear me okay.
I can indeed.
Wonderful, thanks a lot. So I'm going to bring you through Bluetongue disease, as June mentioned. I'll talk about some of the details of the disease itself, and then I'll go into a little bit of detail about what the situation is across Europe in relation to Bluetongue. I'll talk about the increasing risk of a Bluetongue incursion into Ireland, and I'll just familiarise you with our Keep Ireland Free from Bluetongue campaign and the key role that all farmers across the country have to play in its success. So what is Bluetongue? Well, it's a viral disease, and it affects ruminants and camelids. So we're talking about sheep, goats and cattle, and camelid species like llamas and alpacas, and obviously wild animals that fall in under these sort of species classifications can be affected as well. There's 27 strains of Bluetongue recognised worldwide, 11 of which have previously been reported here in Europe. And you'll hear it being talked about in terms of how it's a disease that's spread by biting midges. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the talk. It's classically described as a seasonal disease. So when we talk about that, we're talking about April to November inclusive, typically in this part of the world, which mirrors warmer temperatures, which facilitate midge activity and therefore Bluetongue spread. Thankfully, it's not a zoonotic disease, so it poses no danger to human health or to food safety. So what does Bluetongue look like? Well, most commonly, Bluetongue is seen clinically in sheep. We typically often find that infected cattle and goats can tend to show more subtle signs of the disease, if indeed any at all. But the severity of the disease and the associated death rate can be linked with several things, like the immune status of that particular animal, or indeed the herd and flock affected, and the strain of Bluetongue virus involved. So for example, with Bluetongue virus strain 8, we do tend to see that more cattle in particular show obvious or notable clinical signs of disease. But the reality really is that the disease can present itself as a very wide spectrum of clinical manifestations. And this kind of just gives you a smattering of some of the clinical signs of Bluetongue that might be encountered. So at the top, you can see they can be very nondescript, things like a drop in milk yield or just simple inappetence. And as they get more severe, the signs might be more obvious. So things like reddening of the mucous membranes, sores on the animal's gums or nose or dental pads, progressing to more severe presentations like swelling in their face and lips and tongue, which indeed is where the name Bluetongue comes from. And these animals can then really progress into quite a compromised position where their breathing becomes compromised. They have significant drooling, discharge from their eyes or nose. They can get severe lameness because of inflammation along their coronary bands. And it's also very important to remember that bluetongue can manifest itself as reproductive and fertility issues. So you might see the animals abort their offspring, or indeed have stillborn or deformed offspring at the time of birth. And on the very end of the spectrum then as well, it's not impossible to have death. So the animals actually can die from the disease. This is just a few pictures of some of the more overt signs of clinical bluetongue. On the left-hand side here, you can see a ewe. She's got profuse nasal discharge. Her head is swollen, and in that middle photo there, I hope you can appreciate the fact that her tongue is protruding, it's swollen, and she has some crusty lesions along her nostrils. And if you look down at her feet, there they've shaved off along the coronary band, and you can see this red, nasty inflammation, which would lead clinically to lameness. On the right-hand side then, we have a photo of a cow showing some overt signs. Hopefully it's clear. It might be a little bit difficult to see, but basically what the top right image is showing you is kind of intense reddening of the white part of her eye. And as we go down and we look at her nose, you can see these erosions with nasal discharge, and down to her udder. I'm sure you can all appreciate how swollen or edematous it is, as well as those crusty lesions along her teeth. So I've mentioned earlier about how midges and biting midges are very important in the spread of diseases like bluetongue. So I guess hopefully that little animation has shown quite nicely just how key midges are in the spread of bluetongue virus. Once you have one infected animal, how the midges can just facilitate spread quite rapidly. And I guess the question to ask on the back of that, well, what's going on with midges in Ireland? And from some of the sort of more recent studies to do with midge surveillance that have happened over the past sort of 10, 15 years, the long and the short of it really is that there's two important things to take home about midges in Ireland. And that is that, first of all, the species that are capable of transmitting bluetongue are here in Ireland. And not only are they are here in abundance. So should the disease arrive into Ireland, we know that we have the midges that have the capability to spread it. So just thinking a little bit more about that then, and the various routes of introduction of bluetongue into the country. If we go down the right-hand side first, as we said, vectors such as midges are able to spread the disease, and they could actually technically arrive into the country through active flight. We know that they can cover very significant distances, over hundreds of meters. And obviously, climatic conditions can facilitate this. So that's to do with the wind, for example, and it's also aided by travel over bodies of water, for example, which puts us at an increased risk, seeing that we are an island. Biological products, if they were inadvertently contaminated with bluetongue virus, for example, that could be semen or embryos, or indeed a blood product that was contaminated that subsequently got used in an animal here in Ireland. That's a second route of potential entry into the country. And the one which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in greater detail, obviously, is the import of live animals from affected areas. And these probably, realistically, in terms of what's happening in Ireland today, pose the largest risk and the highest risk of how we might accidentally introduce bluetongue into the country. So just to give you a little bit of context about what has happened across the continent of Europe over the last sort of 10, 15 years, these maps are produced by the European Commission, and the various colours basically just tell you what strain of bluetongue is present in that particular country or region. So you can see back in 2014, for example, bluetongue was really sort of confined down to that sort of southern border in Europe and a little bit towards the east, but was quite far away from us up here in Ireland. By the time we got to 2018, however, you can see that it had really shifted significantly north. France was now, the entire country was endemic for BTV4 and 8. You can see Switzerland as well had become infected, as well as the entire territory in Italy. And if we look at the most current map of bluetongue restricted zones across Europe, this map was provided only last week by the Commission. You can see here that again, Belgium is now fully endemic for strain 8, Luxembourg as well. there's a significant portion of the sort of southwestern part of Germany which has BTV8 within it as well. So it's just to sort of look at this and say, wow, okay, Bluetongue is literally on our doorsteps when it comes to mainland Europe. Obviously, we're sort of particularly lucky in that we have the United Kingdom as almost a buffer zone between us and mainland Europe. The UK at the moment are Bluetongue free, which is obviously a massive bonus in terms of our own risk as well. But the main thing to take away is that it is on our doorstep from mainland Europe. So we really need to think about the risk when it comes to bringing in live animals from susceptible species into the country. So just to go through these graphs, this is just to show some of the stats of animals that have come into the country from mainland Europe over the past 5-6 years. And you can see that when it comes to caprine animals or goats and camelids like llamas and alpacas, the numbers are really small and really not worth making much note of. However, when we go to sheep imports over the same period of time, you can see there that actually between 2016 and 2020, there was a downward trajectory and the numbers had actually decreased in terms of live sheep imports. But quite stark, what's happened this year, and really only from the third quarter on, we've seen a massive upsurge of sheep imports from mainland Europe. We're heading towards 350 animals by the end of the year, which is a significant increase, as you can see, from 2020. And this is mirrored similarly in the number of cattle that have been brought in from mainland Europe over the past 5-6 years as well. You can see there was fairly steady numbers between 2016 and 2019. Again, they took a massive sort of doubling last year, almost hitting the 3,500 live bovine import number. And again, these numbers were pulled last week on the 18th of November. I'd say there's every chance that we will at least match that number by year end, if not surpass it. So with this increased risk with all these live animals imports coming in, it's really important that farmers are being diligent to keep an eye out for this disease and to know what to do should they ever suspect it. So the first thing I would say is do not delay in taking action. If you have concern that an animal you own has Bluetongue, do not delay in reporting it to us. We are much happier to go out and investigate a suspect and rule it out than for someone to sit wondering and worrying and not reporting it. So if you have any concerns, report the case. You can do that by contacting your local veterinary office, 9 to 5 p.m. Those are the sort of standard business office hours. All our regional veterinary offices have their addresses and contact numbers on the department website. And outside of office hours, we have the National Disease Emergency Hotline number 01492 8026. And this is operational every single day of the year to report cases like this. Hopefully some of you have maybe seen this poster lady of our Keep Ireland Free from Bluetongue campaign. We launched her over the summer and you'll be seeing a lot more of her as we head towards the higher risk period next spring as well. And the aim of this campaign is to really ask everybody out there who's keeping livestock to think about Bluetongue and to play their part in protecting Ireland against this disease. We're asking you to really understand those disease risks that importing animals brings with it, and to reach out to your private veterinary practitioner or your regional veterinary office for more information before you decide to just take the plunge. And as well as that, it's very important that if you are going to be importing animals, then you avoid doing so when the risk of spreading Bluetongue is highest. And obviously that ties in with that active period for midges, which, as I said, we classically describe as April to November. But interestingly, and I'm sure a lot of people have noticed, you know, with climate change, etc., the temperatures are getting higher and higher. And I know down where I live, there was certainly a lot of midge activity ongoing still in early November. So that's obviously something that might be a little bit shifting as time moves on. But for now, anyway, with the higher temperature months, the risk of spread of Bluetongue is higher. So we would really encourage you to avoid importing during that time. And why, you might ask, are we getting so worried about Bluetongue, and what really are the ramifications of it should it enter into the country? Well, as I described earlier, obviously clinically it can really be a very unpleasant and nasty disease and have massive effects on the animal, not only in terms of their health, but their productive stats, etc. But as well as that, should the animals come in, for example, into a hypothetical farm here in the middle of Ireland, with a little red centre dot, you can see that in order for us to be able to try and eradicate that disease, if it's spread into the national herd or into the national flock, we would be putting up very significant restriction zones extending as far as 150 kilometers radius away from that outbreak. And in the case of a very small country like us here in Ireland, you can see basically that means that a restriction zone is over pretty much the entire country, bar one or two small areas. And within a restriction zone, there are obviously restrictions on movements, restrictions on exporting live animals, for example. So it has implications on trade and definitely would have a very negative impact on the farming industry and sector overall. So it's definitely something we definitely don't want to see coming into the country. So again, I'll just leave you with a few questions to ask yourself before you take the plunge and decide to bring in an imported animal from mainland Europe. First of all, well, is that import really necessary? If you're looking to seek genetic gains, for example, well, are there other methods that you might be able to achieve the same aim, such as by doing embryo transfer or AI? Where are you planning on bringing these animals in from? Is it a reputable source? And what additional guarantees of disease-free status can they give you? For example, pre-import PCR testing. Are the animals pregnant? And not to go too much into this, but it's just to sort of flag the fact that pregnant animals, especially those who would come in contact with certain strains of bluetongue, such as BTV8, we know that they have the possibility of spreading the virus to their unborn offspring in the womb. So what you could actually be doing by bringing in an affected pregnant animal is not only bringing in a dam who could be infected herself, but if she was to calve down, you could have sort of a Trojan animal on your farm as well, who is actually born infected and therefore could be a source of spread onwards in the country. So pregnant animals are riskier animals to import, and that's something that people should really keep in mind if they're bringing in imports at all in the first place. And finally, then, it's important to remember that there's certain things that you need to take on in terms of personal responsibility if you're bringing in animals from mainland Europe. So you need to be able to isolate these animals when they arrive. Our inspectors will go out, they'll look at the animals, they'll take post-import samples for infectious diseases such as bluetongue and others. And as well as that, it's very possible that we might ask for access to certain other documentation, things like vaccination records, etc., if required. So there's a big sort of personal responsibility piece on making sure that if you are going to take this risk, that you can mitigate it on farm as much as possible. So our final key sort of take-home messages then I'll leave you with is just to remind you again that that risk of a bluetongue incursion into Ireland is increasing, especially given that upward trajectory of numbers of cattle and sheep coming in from mainland Europe into the country. We know that biting midges are capable of spreading the virus. They're here in Ireland and they're here in large numbers. So now is the time to heighten your awareness about the disease, especially in relation to the risk posed by importing susceptible species. We have plenty of information on our website, www.gov.ie/bluetongue, and that'll ping you on to a number of other useful resources, such as the European Commission page on bluetongue. It'll link you in with those restriction zone maps, so you'll be able to see what the status of bluetongue across the European continent is, and a lot of other useful information. So please educate yourself about bluetongue. If you have any further questions, always get in contact with our regional veterinary officers, who will be more than happy to help you. So with that, I'll say thank you again, and I'll hand back to you, June.
Thanks, Sunita. That was a very interesting talk.